Vicki? Oh, that's right. I have the honor of introducing Craig Hensley. Craig is with Texas Parks and Wildlife. He is the kind of one of the two Texas nature trackers biologists. I can't believe there are only two of you that do all of that work. He is also, he's worked for the agency for 14 years. He has a very long career in environmental education, and he likes sharing his passion with the natural world. And yesterday we had the great opportunity of being at Nash Prairie with Susan Conate, and oh my gosh, what fun we had out there. He is, where are you from? Minnesota or? And from Iowa, but he spent time in Minnesota, and he has a Bachelor of Science in Fisheries and Wildlife Management and a Master of Science in Zoology. He likes everything. He likes birds, he likes bees, butterflies, and growing native plants. Susan, he also has a native plant yard, and I guess doesn't have to deal with an HOA concerning that. So he is a father of two adult children. One lives in Boston, the other one lives in New Zealand, and he has 5 grandchildren. So welcome, Craig. I'm so glad you've come, and we're really looking forward to hearing it from you.
Good. Oh, there we go. Let's see how loud that is. Is that okay? Okay. Is this? There we go. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for inviting me down. And yeah, yesterday was a great day. I'd never been to Nash Prairie, or can't remember the name of the other one, but they were both spectacular. Thank you. They were just fantastic, and to spend the day out in the field with 3 wonderful master naturalists was fantastic too. So, and we got back before the rain started, so that was the other key thing there. What I'm going to be doing today is talking about bats. Some of you, hopefully all of you, know about the Bat Project, and if you attended I think it was January training for that on TMN Tuesday, this is going to have some similarity, but it'll have a bunch of different slides as well. So we'll talk a little bit more detail about certain things. So hopefully there's no conflict with getting an hour of advanced training today. If you have questions throughout, don't hesitate to ask. Is that too loud? Yeah, can you? I got a big voice, so I normally don't use these things, but is that better? A little better? Okay. All right. When you do interpretation all your life, you get used to talking loud, and then you get into regular conversations and you're still talking loud. My wife has to remind me of that all the time. So I apologize if I accidentally do that. Don't hesitate to stop me. But if you have questions throughout, don't hesitate to ask. We'll go ahead and answer those as we go along. Just to tell you a little bit about our program, I am with the Texas Nature Trackers program, which is part of the Wildlife Diversity Program, which is also, of course, then part of the Wildlife Division, which is then part of Texas Parks and Wildlife. Our little program is part of the Community Stewardship and Engagement Program. So some of you may have met Michelle Haggerty, who oversees the Master Naturalist Program for Texas Parks and Wildlife. She is my boss. I work. We have a team of 4. Her at the helm, 2 trackers biologists, and 1 person that does all of our media stuff. is very good, Lee. So my colleague is Wendy Anderson. She's coming on her first year actually here in the next couple of months. She's awesome. Maybe you've seen, we have a Facebook page and she posts all kinds of great things to Facebook and is a wonderful presenter and super enthusiastic. And when you get a chance to attend one of her programs, please do. You'll be blown away. She's awesome. So I'm very fortunate to be able to get to work with her. Our program basically is designed to go out and try to recruit citizen scientists to get out and help us document the flora and the fauna of the state of Texas. So the BAT project is a very new and kind of a unique effort to do that in one regard. But we use iNaturalist primarily as the tool to try to engage people. So we travel the state, giving presentations on iNaturalist and trying to engage the public that way. One of the things that we have that I've observed over a long career is that agencies like Texas Parks and Wildlife do the best they can with the information they have. But a lot of times when it comes to resource management of individual species, whether it's plants or animals, we don't have all the facts. And part of that is because there's not enough staff in the state. You could never hire enough biologists to figure all that out. And that's where citizen scientists can really have a significant impact. They may not know it at the time that they go out and take a picture of something on iNat and post it on iNaturalist. However, the reality is at some point that data may become really important in terms of conservation efforts of some rare plant or some rare animal, or even one that's not so rare today. With all the changes going on, certain species are disappearing for different reasons. Some are expanding their ranges. All of that information becomes useful. So I think it's important that we engage the citizenry, just like you all try to do with the work that you all do. So I want to say how much I appreciate you all and your efforts, because without a group of dedicated folks like Master Naturalists around Texas, a lot less would be known about our flora and fauna in the state, and a lot less conservation as a result would be getting done. We try to get that information. We share it with the research and conservation community. And we do what we're focusing on. Let's see, there we go. What we're focusing on primarily are what are known as species of greatest conservation need. And these are plants or animals that are in decline or have declined, and we're trying to figure out what we can do to prevent further declines of those so that they don't have to be ranked as threatened or endangered species, either at the state or the federal level. And in Texas right now, there's somewhere around between 12 and 1,300 species of plants and animals considered SGCN. The idea is to get those observations out of iNaturalist, get them to what well, my drive down from Bernie to here yesterday, the reason that's important is because there's a lot of road construction in the state. And TxDOT, one of their requirements is they have, before they initiate a project, they have to know what's in the way of a new project or a change in a project. So they have to review this and find out if there's any rare plant communities, any rare or unusual animals or individual plant species, and then mitigate that so that they're not wiped out. In fact, down in the valley, you have a lot of different kinds of milkweed in the state of Texas. We ran across a couple of them yesterday out in the field. There's one species called prostrate milkweed that only grows in a couple of, I think, Starr County and maybe one other county down, Hidalgo maybe, down in the valley. And I was fortunate enough a few weeks ago when I was down there for monarch training with National Wildlife Federation to be able to go out and find that species. And on that roadside, there was construction from TxDOT. And one side of the road they weren't going to do anything with because of the number of plants, but the other side they were going to completely modify that. So I think they were working on how we were going to take the individual plants that were there, because literally you can count the number of these plants that are in Texas, and what they were going to do to try to mitigate that. So that's the kind of thing that this kind of data and research data allows us to try to take care of. We do that, by the way, with a lot of iNaturalist projects that we host on our webpage. There we go. All right, so today we're going to talk about the distribution of bats as it's related to mostly you all. And then we're going to talk about NA bat a little bit. We're going to talk about the acoustic monitoring project. We're also then, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about specific bats that are found in this area and a little bit of their natural history. And then also I want to go into a little bit more detail on echolocation and some of their natural history. So we'll cover a lot of things during the course of the presentation. So bats look like that when they're in skeletal form. I always, the first time I ever saw one of these in a glass case, I thought, man, that looks a lot like a human being. Now, granted, there's some exceptions. We don't have fingers quite that long. Our knees are bent a little bit differently, and our feet are not facing the other direction. But if you look at it, they've got shoulders and shoulder blades and rib cage and knees and ankles and fingers, and it's actually kind of neat. Bats are known as chiroptera, which means hand wing, and you can literally see the hand of a bat. So they're flying with their hands, with really, really long fingers with skin stretched between them. And of course, one of the things about bats is for the history of, and I love this cartoon, by the way, so I'll give you a chance to read it. Yeah, I think that's hilarious. So, bats have been, for much of human history, have been pilloried for being, smelly and unclean and flying in your hair and doing all these crazy things that they really don't do. But that's kind of the case with animals that are mysterious to most of us because we don't see them during the day flying around like we do birds. Most of them aren't terribly colorful. In fact, when you get a good close look up at the face of most bats, yikes. There are some interesting looking bats out there in the world. And of course, the constant threat of rabies, that's what everybody thinks. And of course, now bats, to add to the list of bad things about bats was the whole COVID thing and the mystery behind that. Turns out bats can transport some diseases. There's no doubt about it. But most of us aren't handling bats. And if you ever do find a bat in your house or the belfry or whatever, always wear gloves. Always wear gloves because they bite and that bite draws blood in a hurry. And I'm speaking from experience. So there are a lot of bat myths out there that bats are blind. A lot of people still believe this, believe it or not. People still believe bats are blind. Bats actually can see as well as you and I, and fruit bats can actually see better than humans can. So they actually have extraordinarily good vision. But when you hunt at night, you got to use some other technique. They don't have that good a vision, night vision. So that's where they use echolocation. The whole thing about bats getting tangled in your hair, it turns out that a bat can actually detect an individual human hair with its echolocation. So the only way that's going to happen is if you're standing in front of a cave and a million bats are flying out at you, the chances are one of them may brush against you. But the only person that's responsible for that behavior is you. So I would say don't stand in front of a cave when bats are coming out, especially if you got, big hair, Texas hairdos or that kind of thing. We always made a joke about this, but a former bat biologist was in a cave and actually had a bat land in her hair. So she goes, well, actually, but in ordinary circumstance, that's not happening. All bats are vampires. A lot of people think that they all draw blood. There's only 4 species globally that do that. Only 4, and none of them yet are in Texas. That may change in the next 10, 15 years. We'll see. As one species is moving north. Bats are flying mice. In fact, the German word, does anybody know the German word for bat? Fledermaus, which means flying mouse. And they are not mice. They're not even closely related to mice. So they're very, very different that way. All right. And that all bats have rabies. Turns out that's not true at all. Now, one of the things you have to understand about the rabies reporting, they're only reporting on the bats that come into them to the disease control center. So it looks worse than it is. Okay. And usually a bat that gets rabies, contracts rabies, dies very quickly. So they're not going to be, flying around in hordes of them all carrying rabies looking to attack human beings. So the bat facts, they are mammals. They're the only mammal capable of true flight, as I'm sure that you all know. Nearly 25% of all mammals are bats. The only group that has more species are? What group of mammals have more species than bats? Yeah. Yep, rodents. My clicker will go. Well, somewhere there's going to be an answer to that question pop up. All right. Most give birth to only one pup a year, and they are very long lived. The oldest known bat was 41 years old. Our most common bat in Texas, the Mexican free-tailed, can live upwards of 15 years. So a long time. So if you're only producing one bat baby per year, and on average their mortality is about 50%, it takes a while to build up a population. And so down in other parts of the world, including some here, but mostly in other parts of the world where they go in and they're afraid of bats because they're not educated about them, and they go in and destroy entire caves worth of them. It can take decades for the population to build back. White nose syndrome, the disease that is affecting bats right now, all over all over North America, has wiped out entire caves of bats throughout the eastern third of the United States. I mean, they're gone. We're having that happen here in Texas in the hill country with the cave myotis, whereas a few years ago there were caves of cave myotis where there were literally thousands of them. Those caves are empty now. Because the presumption is that it's because of white nose syndrome. And of course, the other thing is they're very clean animals. They groom themselves. They take care of their young and keep them clean. Interestingly enough, I was once told that the Mexican free-tailed bat smells like a taco. Not with the meat, just the taco. And so in my years of catching bats, they do. So, and of course, the thing about the stink and smell comes from what? The guano in the caves. Now that has a pretty strong smell. And of course, they've been around for a very, very long time evolutionarily. There it is. There's rodents. All right, so currently, and this changes. There's actually been a couple of new bat species discoveries around the world just in the last few years, but more than 1,400 species globally. In North America, there are 47. In Texas, technically, there have been 33 species found and documented. Of those, 3 of them have only a single record, so they're kind of vagrant. And then one, they had a fossilized, I think it was a fossilized record of a vampire bat out by Comstock from a long time ago. So we have more bat diversity in Texas than there is anywhere else in the country. They're found in every continent and almost every country except the poles and some islands. So when we talk about bats, there's 2 large groups of bats. There's the micro bats and the mega bats. If you want to try to pronounce Vesper blah 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 and Pteropodiformes, go for it. Megachiroptera and Microchiroptera are the suborders. Let's see here. There we go. The microbats, that's the majority of bats that we find on the world. They're widely distributed. All of them echolocate. They have a claw on their thumb, but you might think, well, okay, but they do have a claw on their thumb, and that helps them when they're trying to hang on cave walls and places. And all of our Texas bats are considered microbats, even though our largest bat has a wingspan of about 22 inches. That doesn't sound very microscopic or micro, but they are smaller. Let's see here. The megabats, there are about 186 species. They're mostly tropical and subtropical. The majority of them do not echolocate. What are the most of them eating? Fruit. Okay. So that they will feed on those fruit. They don't need to echolocate to find something like that. during the day, daylight hours. They have a claw on their thumb and second digit, and the largest bats have wingspans of sometimes over 2 feet. And I got to tell you, and actually much can be much longer than that. If I saw a bunch of those flying at me, it had a wingspan of 3 or 4 feet. That'd be kind of freaky. And of course, bats, just like every animal, they have lots of body parts. There'll be a quiz on this at the end of the presentation, so take your screenshot now. No, I'm just kidding. But you can see how the fingers are distributed with the wings. You'll see where the different membranes are. There's membranes between the 2 feet, membrane between the foot and the thumb and the first finger, basically. So there's lots of very thin skin, but it's 2 layers, so you can see the blood vessels in there. And this is amongst the most quickly repairing tissue in the animal world. If they tear their wing, it can be self-repaired within a matter of days. So, which if as an animal like this, it depends on those wings to fly, that would be really important. There we go. So the wing membrane itself is known as the patagium. You can see that there's 4 different parts or 4 different named sections of it. It has that lower and upper skin layer with muscles and elastic tissue. Has anybody ever had the opportunity to feel the wing on a bat? A few of you. It's kind of neat, isn't it? I mean, I just got an interesting, I find it to be a very soft texture. The teeth, on the other hand, aren't so soft, as you can see from that. And so that's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize. When you look at the skull of a bat, they have a lot of sharp pointed teeth. Now, as a bat, why would you need all those sharp pointed teeth? Yeah, and what else? Hold on to it and to crunch through the exoskeleton, right? Yes. So those that are eating beetles, that's a hard exoskeleton. So those teeth, those sharp pointed teeth, are really effective for doing that. So even their molars are sharp. So a lot of bats, not all, but a lot of bats have a nose leaf, which is basically a projection from the nose. And then, of course, the tragus, which is a little structure inside the ear that all bats have. And in fact, when you go to identify bats, a lot of times you actually look at the tragus, the shape, the length, to see which species it is in similar species. All of that is designed to help with the emanating of echolocation calls or the receiving of the echolocation calls. And then, of course, a lot of bats have wrinkles around their faces and places like that, and that's all supposed to help with that as well. The nose leaf actually helps direct the calls. The echolocation calls can come from their nose or their mouth. So just depends on the species. And then they have a lot of just interesting, crazy looking animals. The Chapin's free-tailed bat, I love that. It's from Australia. I think it's from Australia. The Australian ghost-faced bat, kind of a freaky looking thing. That those lips just look really weird. And then the flying fox, which to me looks like a dog, right? Like a puppy dog. Yeah. The ghost-faced bat, yeah, kind of does look kangarooish. So there you go. Just they're fascinating looking creatures. And then, of course, here in Texas, we have the spotted bat. Now that's a pair of ears. I refer to that as the Dumbo bat. But they eat very small insects. So those great big ears for getting the sounds back after echolocating off their food supply. This is one of the few bats in Texas I have not had the pleasure of capturing. Did you ever get to, Marcia? New Mexico, yeah. Fabulous bats. Only in Texas, it's mostly found in the Trans-Pecos. So let's talk a little bit about the sensory world of bats. We'll start with echolocation, and basically that's emitting a high frequency sound that we, for the most part, with most species, we cannot hear. It's above our hearing capability. They emit that signal, and then it can go out as far as 65 feet. Okay, and then it bounces off different things, comes back to the bat, they can analyze what exactly they're looking at. And so that it's used for navigation, obviously, for avoiding obstacles, for capturing prey. And then in terms of the prey, they can determine distance, direction, velocity, shape, size, and texture of the prey based on that echolocation call. This is another one of those examples when we humans think we're all superior to everything else out there. We can't do that. We can't. We can. I mean, think about this. We see something. Let's say 10 people are out and then they see something go by. There'll be 10 different explanations of what they saw in detail, right? So, you know, the word smart or intelligent, I don't know. That seems pretty impressive to me, and causes me to have a great deal of respect for these creatures. And the more you learn about the natural world, whether it's insects or anything else, it's pretty amazing what's going on out there. They have variations in their frequencies, of course. When they're moving around and they're just doing their standard search phases, it may be several seconds between. But as they get close to prey, and I'm going to show you demonstrate that with an actual echolocation reading a little bit later, they can increase to 200 pulses per second. And that's what's known as a feeding buzz. So if you've ever been able to hear a bat detector and you hear the little ping noises, and all of a sudden it goes pop, 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 pop. That says they're getting closer. They're sending out more signals to zone in on that individual prey item. And then you literally hear a popping sound when they presumably have caught the insect. And then bats with small ears use high frequency sounds to capture small prey. Bats with larger ears use lower frequency sounds to capture prey. And they can even take prey right off of the leaves of trees. So you'll see a lot of bats, and this is important for this bat project. A lot of bats feed right on the edge of the woods. So you don't have to be on the interior of the woods with a detector. Right on the edge between a field and a wood lot is a great place to find a lot of bats. So a little bit more hearing. The ears of bats function as antenna. They help detect and amplify sound, of course. They also hear the normal sounds that we do. And notice that it has been found that their hearing may be 10 times more sensitive than human hearing, depending on the species. Vision, they see quite well. Of course, they use that for long distance. Some bats are migratory, so they use that for long distance movements, locating landmarks especially. And then they have a unique and very good sense of smell. In fact, when a Mexican free-to-hell mother goes into the cave to find her baby, the babies are all stacked together, as you'll see in an image here in a little bit. They can pick out their one baby by the sound that their baby makes and their smell. Pretty neat. And of course, bats have different survival strategies. They can, some are migratory. One of the bats that comes presumably through this part of the state, the hoary bat, is a migratory bat. The silver-haired bat comes through this part of the state. It's migratory as well. The northern yellow bat is migratory. The eastern red bat. Some are going to stay here for the winter, and some are going to be moving around. And then others will go into hibernation, just like the classic stage of hibernation, where they slow down their heart rate and their breathing, and they put on fat to get through the winter. And the cave myotis is a classic example. In West Texas, the pallid bat. The tricolored bat I put a question mark there because in the eastern half of the United States, they are hibernators. Here in Texas, we're starting to find out that maybe they're not. So the tricolored bat is probably within the year going to be listed as an endangered species, maybe threatened, but I think it's going to be endangered because of white nose syndrome. White nose syndrome is killing hibernating bats and in caves with big colonies. The tricolored bat, there's some evidence from recent research here in Texas that they aren't actually hibernating. So they may be carrying the fungus, but the fungus may not be able to grow on them because they're waking up and they're going out and foraging. And the whole thing with white nose syndrome is it gets onto the bat and it's a very irritating thing apparently, and so it causes them to wake up. And those bats that have stored fat for the winter, they start using up that fat, and then they end up starving to death because they can't go find food in the middle of winter time. So the tricolor bat may be, it may be very interesting here in Texas how that goes. Of course, about 3/4 of bats eat insects. There are bats that, different species, of course, that eat fruit. There are nectar feeding bats. Notice I put 2. There's actually now a third that's been confirmed. The pallid bat, some researchers recently in the last couple of years were catching pallid bats in West Texas, and they started noticing that there was pollen all over their muzzle. And it turns out they're actually nectar feeding on the flowers of lechugia, which is one of the classic plants of the Chihuahuan Desert. So that adds a third species. Some species around the world actually feed on frogs, fish. Others eat each other. And then, of course, there's a few that feed on blood. Bats have lots of predators, everything from owls and hawks. If you have any of you ever had the chance to go over to San Antonio to the Bracken Cave and see that? Did you, when you were there, did you see any hawks or anything flying? Yeah. So the hawks come out when the bats come out, and they dive down and grab them out of the air and eat them. Sometimes they're eating them while they're flying around, then they go and eat another one. Snakes will live outside of the cave entrances, and some bats, they run into each other because there's so many coming out. They hit the ground. Sometimes snakes are there or raccoons are there to snatch them. And then if a bat falls down into a cave that has lots of guano, that's what you're seeing in that image. There are the flesh-eating beetles, dermestid beetles. They can literally skeletonize a bat within several minutes. I've seen a video of it, and it's freaky. They go from being a bat to a bat skeleton in very short order. That's why you should never walk into a cave full of guano without some kind of protection. Not only for your nose and breathing, but for your, you don't want them chewing on you. And they will start doing that. I've been told. So, of course, we always wonder where bats roost. A lot of times the classic thought is that they roost in caves, which they do. So this picture, you can see one bat happening to be flying around. All of this, those are bats. And so they literally, for Mexican free-tail bats, they can put about, I think it's about 120 bats in 1 square foot. So if you look down at the tile, imagine about 100 bats in that one of those squares. Pretty impressive. They're stacked in there. Apparently, individual space is not a concern for those species. And then some use rock crevices, and others use under the eaves of buildings or in buildings. These happen to be pallid bats, by the way. Some actually will just find a leaf and sleep under the leaf during the day. I found this was up when I worked in Missouri. This eastern red bat was just sleeping on a deciduous plant. Just happened to be there for the entire day. Pretty cool. Some, of course, use bark and snags. This happens to be a tricolored bat that I actually found when I worked at Guadalupe River State Park. Somebody called one day and said, there's a bat stuck on a fishing hook out over the river. And I was like, what? So I went down there, and sure enough, right in the middle of the river was a bat that got its wing caught. So maybe it can't detect everything, right? And it was just hanging there trying to get loose. The wing was torn. I was able to step on rocks, and I'm a big guy, so balance on a rock in a moving river, and get him off of there, and that was him or her. And when I let it go, it immediately flew to this cedar tree and crawled into that crevice and spent the day. Wasn't there the next day. And of course, even under bridges, there's bridges here in Houston, in the Houston area. There's bridge. This is the famous bridge in Austin. Of course, there's bridges now in San Antonio. And if you remember back in that winter storm Uri, one of the things that happened in San Antonio, a lot of Mexican free-tail bats, literally those huge garbage bags full of them died, froze to death, and died and fell off out from under those bridges. So you all had the sea turtles and everything else down in this neck of the woods, and we had bats and other critters that were suffering through that storm. There we go. So let's talk about a few of the bats that you find here. This picture, and I forgot to give her credit, but this picture is taken by a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, or technician or somebody with the Fish and Wildlife. This is your Raffinisk's big-eared bat. Isn't that a great picture? I love that picture. By the way, it's a boy. Um, hard for that to not be obvious. Um, so this is the first time I put this in a presentation. I wasn't sure how I was gonna, because somebody was gonna go, what are those large lumps on its back? They got a parasite. Um, so anyway, this bat is only found in East Texas, as you know. It's more common across the southeast, but in Texas, it is considered an SGCN. It roosts in hollow trees, in certain types of styles of bridges, or certain old buildings. If there's big hollows somewhere in that building, they are mostly eating small moths, it turns out. Um, and a lot is not known about their winter habits here in Texas. So there's still much to be learned about this particular bat. So and this county is potentially within that range. So it'll be interesting to see if any of your detectors pick up this particular species of bat. And it's a cool looking bat. Then, of course, one of the more common bats in the northeast part of Texas is the big brown bat. It has dark brown pelage. It's got a pretty broad nose on it for some bats that have more of a narrow nose. Apparently, they're year-round. This was loaned to me from the interpreter at Caddo Lake State Park, who found it had fallen out of a tree, I guess. It roosts in a lot of different places. It seems to prefer buildings nowadays, human buildings. This is the bat, one of the classic bats that's found in everybody's, somebody's house. It somehow finds its way in. It apparently is a beetle specialist, feeding primarily on those small beetles flying around at night. But again, this is one of the bats that confounds people trying to analyze echolocation data, because its call is in the range of a whole lot of other species, and it overlaps with another bat, the silver-haired bat. The silver-haired bat in Texas is kind of interesting. If you look in the by the way, the Bats of Texas book is your best source for bat information. Really, really good book. It shows a statewide distribution, but the physical records of bats, those where they are museum specimens, show them in different parts of the state. Not necessarily, there's been no physical records here in this state, but they are included because they could be here. These are migratory species, whereas the Raffinisk's is not. It's thought to be a year-rounder. But this guy is a migratory one, and the females typically will leave the state to go have babies, like the hoary bat. The males will stay farther behind. So this is, even though this is a common bat, it's one of the bats that in Texas, we don't have a good understanding of where they're ranging. So this bat project is one of the things, if we can separate a silver-haired bat from a big brown bat, from a Mexican free-tail bat, from, a host of others, tricolored bat, we'll maybe be able to gain more understanding about how this bat moves through the state of Texas and where you find it during the spring season anyway. But it gets its name. It's a black furred bat with silver tips on the individual hairs of the bat. Beautiful looking thing. But it roosts in dead trees and woodpecker holes, similar places like that. It is one of the bats that is really worrying in terms of the wind generation. The wind, I always call them windmills. Turbines, thank you. That this bat is potentially a major victim of those wind turbines. And some companies will share that data, and other companies refuse to share the data. So that's some of the work that has to be done, is in order for us to know what's going on, we need, again, it's another example of, you got to have the information to know what's really happening. Even if it's bad information, you still need to know. But because this is a migratory bat, this may be one that's suffering quite a lot across its range, not just here in Texas. And then there's the hoary bat, another migratory bat. This is related to the eastern and western red bats, same genus. It is a statewide bat. It is a migratory bat, so the females leave the state of Texas and go to the north to have their babies. They roost in trees, and they eat a lot of large moths. And they do not like to be held. in case you're wondering. I made the mistake of getting bit on the bare hand one time by one of those, but they're really one of the most beautiful bats I think we have in Texas. Just that pelage is just absolutely, frosted pelage is absolutely beautiful. This is another SGCN. If you look on the range map, it may be here, it may not be here, but that's why, again, this bat project to document where bats are in Texas, we'll learn a lot about where these guys are distributed over time. And one of the more common bats, not an SGCN, is Eastern red bat. This is going to be a bat that a lot of you probably have flying around your house at night. It does not roost in big colonies. It just finds it like this picture shows. It finds a leaf and sleeps. You'll notice one of the neat things about this particular bat, see all of this? This is its tail, and you see how heavily furred it is. So it actually uses that to pull it up over it to stay warm when it's sleeping. And of course, it carries its babies around. This is one of the bats that'll have multiple babies, and it will fly around with all the babies on its belly, which is pretty amazing. This is a female bat because of the white tips on the fur. So this is, again, and this is actually, if it's not dark, you can actually kind of identify this because you can see kind of an orangey red bat flying around. That's going to be this guy. The western red bat, which looks very similar to this, is very rare in West Texas. So you're not going to see that out this way. And here's the tricolored bat, one of our more common bats in the state of Texas, a very small one. That is my hand. This is my thumb in the glove. You can see how small the bat is. It's the second smallest bat in Texas. This is a bat that roosts around East Texas in culverts, especially box culverts under roads. So there's a lot of research going on with those overwintering bats in those culverts. That's where they have found white nose syndrome. They've treated those culverts to try to see if that would help through some kind of spray. What they're finding is that the bats get the white nose syndrome on them, the fungus, but they don't get the disease. So the question is, what's going on there? And that's actually a good thing, right? The question is where are they moving? If they're moving around at all, and it's thought that so tricolored bats, we don't know if they're that migratory or not, or if they're intermingling with other populations where they could actually help carry the spores to cause more problems. This is no birth. Each baby weighs 50% of the weight of the mother. Yeah, ouch is right. When I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm never going to say anything about somebody being pregnant or any other animal being pregnant ever again. Not that I did, but this is the bat right now. It's being proposed for listing by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The challenge with this listing is that it may potentially could affect land management because prescribed fire with the smoke could impact where roost sites are. The challenge with this bat, if it's declared that, is that in the wintertime, they roost in, like I said, culverts, they roost in caves. Most burning is done in the winter. So you may not be able to burn very close. I think they're saying talking about potentially a 12-mile limit somewhere in there. But here's the other thing. In the summertime, they roost anywhere. And they don't use the same roost every night. So that, again, could impact things. But of course, most burning for that particular practice doesn't happen during the summertime. So it'll be interesting to see how that is all comes to pass. The other bat in Texas that I wanted to mention that may be in your area, it's a widely distributed bat, the cave myotis. This is the bat that's disappearing all over the hill country. It's a bat that comes out a little bit later. It roosts with Mexican freetail bats. This bat apparently is a hibernator. The migration of this bat, a lot of them are thought to go to the panhandle to overwinter, which may be, and they've now found white nose syndrome in the panhandle and in the hill country, and they may be moving this disease back and forth between caves. And apparently, it hits the population in a particular cave, they die off completely. So this may be another bat coming down the pipe that has to be considered for listing as well. We'll have to see. But you see it there, it's suffered an estimated 75% population decline in the hill country due to white nose syndrome. Yes. That's over the last 5. Yeah. Yeah. It's happened quickly. They used to have, they put monitors out on those caves to see what's coming in and out, and they've gone to 0. They've gone to literally no echolocation calls in some of these cave systems. So there's some research. There's a place called Old Tunnel State Park between Fredericksburg and Comfort. There's a small, historically, there have been about a roost of about, the estimate was about 3,000 of these with about 1.5 million Mexican free-tail bats. Summer, they're going to try to get out there to see if those cave myotas still exist. My ex-wife and I actually were one of the first people to detect the disease. We were the first ones to detect the fungus at Old Tunnel. We were, I think, the second or third in the state to actually find the fungus on a bat. And it was actually found on a Mexican free-tail bat, but the Mexican free-tail bats don't hibernate, so they're not thought to be impacted by the disease. So it's kind of scary. Think what could happen. And if you think about the millions and billions, I mean, just it's uncountable numbers of insects that these animals eat at night. If these animals disappear in any significant number, that could have a dramatic impact on the plant life that those insects would otherwise eat, feed on. There's all kinds of ramifications for the decline of our bats. Did somebody have their hand raised? Yes. They can carry the fungus. So the fungus or the spores of the fungus, but you don't have the disease until you see the fungus growing or the spores become the fungus and start growing on them. So they can transport spores. We can transport the spores. If we went into a cave that had the disease, theoretically, and that's how they think it came from Europe to North America, is by unintentional human transportation. Yeah. Yes. No. And again, they're not hibernating. So they haven't found any of the that I know of Mexican freetails that have died from white nose syndrome, because there's something about I don't know all the dynamics of this particular disease. So, but it seems to only affect the hibernating bats that are deep in sleep. And then when they're rousted from sleep because of the fungus growing on them, and it looks real whitish and get on mostly around their face. They can get it on their wings. So it becomes so irritating. They come out of hibernation, and then I think it's brown fat that they've stored for the winter to get through the winter. They start burning that up really quickly as they're moving around, and that's what ultimately leads to them starving to death. Yeah, and it's probably the fact that they're able to get out and move and forage and stuff that it just for whatever reason doesn't affect those bats. It also doesn't affect any of the tree bats that we know of. That it's the ones that are in those caves that are hibernating for long months at a time. And if you're an Indiana bat up in the Midwest, and you got it, from November to March, you're not going to find any food. So if you're being awakened by something constantly, that's why they try to keep people out of caves during the winter months so they're not disturbing bats. Same thing applies here for tricolor bats if they are in fact hibernating, or any other bats that might be hibernating. So, but those are great questions, and I don't know if all the answers. There's a lot of research effort going into this disease right now. Yes. So it depends on the species. So big-eared bat, there we go. Aphanous big-eared bat will roost in small colonies. So, but a red bat, like what I showed you previously, they generally roost by themselves. So, and a tricolored bat in the summertime is roosting by itself, generally. And then in the wintertime, it's roosting with many of its own. So it just depends on the species, and sometimes it depends on the time of the year for that particular species. You bet. Good question. Yes. Yes, sir.
Boost.
They can, yes. Yeah. So for example, at Old Tunnel State Park, we've got Mexican free-tailed bats and cave myotis. So yeah, they usually, from my limited understanding of this, and if somebody wants to add anything to this, because I know there's one person in here at least that's done some work on bats, that they typically are separated. You know, this bat may be, this species may be over here, and the other species may be over here. So I think that's generally true, right? Yeah, yeah. And I know also, like at Old Tunnel, for example, the Mexican free-tailed bats usually come out early, and the cave myotis come out sometime after that. So different behaviors. And even as they exit the railroad tunnel, they behave differently as they come out too. The Mexican free-tails come out and they're circling and circling to get up, you know, those vortexes to get up and out. The cave myotis just shoot out and through the woods and off they go. At least that's what we've witnessed. And then, of course, we do have the Brazilian or Mexican free-tailed bat, most common bat in Texas. Somewhere around 100 million live in the hill country. They roost massive numbers. And Bracken Cave has got the largest concentration of mammals on Earth if you take out humans. It's just amazing. And if you ever are in the San Antonio area during the summer and you have the opportunity to go there, go there. It is a display that goes on literally all night long. There are so many bats coming out of this cave. It's overwhelming of what's going on with them. One night years ago, I got to camp there. We were in a tent, and all night long it sounded like it was raining. And it was guano. Yeah, yeah. Now here's the deal. You saw those guano pellets in that other photograph. They're dry. Okay, they're very dry. But you know, if you're sitting there and you don't have a hat on, just saying. When next time you wash your hair, you might be washing it with a little bit of remains of insect. So kind of cool. It's kind of interesting to think about, right? Of course, it's a free-tailed bat because the tail actually extends beyond the patagium or the skin there between the legs. They can eat an average of 40 large moths per night. So the estimate is that, and hopefully I get close to this, they can eat in one night, that colony at Bracken can eat like the equivalent of, I think it's 12 or 14 elephants in weight. And of course, they're feeding mostly on the corn earworm moth, which is pretty cool. They will fly as high as 10,000 feet. They can fly about 35 miles an hour. A lot of bats just kind of fluttering around. These guys get out and they'll fly for 40, 50 miles to where they go to hunt, which is over a lot of times over those cornfields in southeast Texas. So you'll see their flight pattern distributing out from San Antonio and heading southeast. They this picture, every time I look at this picture, I think she's like, what have I gotten myself into? But they are packed in there. So it's amazing that there was a time when they thought that the females just fed whoever, you know, grabbed onto their teat as soon as they got back to the cave. But it turns out that is not the case. Oh, 250 tons of insects per night. So think about this. Take away that species, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but just if you took away that species of bat, that's a lot more moths flying and laying their eggs on corn plants and cotton plants. That's a lot more chemical that has to be put on the landscape to control them. So the ramifications are pretty dramatic. This is a picture of the inside of Bracken Cave. That's guano. I've walked in here. I got the fortunate opportunity to walk in there once, and I was wearing hip waders, sinking into my up to my knees in dry guano again. And then everything on these walls are bats. That's all bats. And that's just on the inside wall. It's a big cave. And one of the, I used to volunteer at Old Tunnel to do interpretive programming at night. And so when right before the bats would come out, I'd look at the audience and say, okay, you guys are going to count for the first 5 minutes. You guys are going to count for the second 5 minutes, and we're going to get an estimate. But it's uncountable numbers. It's just amazing. That one. It is impressive. It really is. There. Yeah, right. Peel back shuck a ear of corn and it's full of worms. Yes. The bats could, yeah, there is evidence that if they're eating insects that are just like birds, they can bioaccumulate that. So yes, they can be, absolutely. All right, so just to kind of give you a taste of what you would be in for when you, Lee Smith, our information specialist within our program, shot this video. It's in slow motion, and hopefully it will play. Yeah, they form a vortex coming out of it. I heard somebody say the word vortex. And they look like huge bats when they're in there. They have really long, narrow wings for bats because they're fast flying. And one of the things I forgot to tell you, so they come out here, they do this vortex, kind of a bat tornado. They all disperse. When they're coming back into the caves, they're coming in at speeds of about 100 miles an hour. And at Old Tunnel one time, we went out there in the early morning and stood above the cave, and we just stood there like this. And they were coming under our arms, and you could hear the wind coming, the wind being generated from their wings, just and they just go in, like you just I saw your motion. It looks like they're all going to just crash into the cave. It doesn't look possible that they can slow down, and it's impressive. But it's just a beautiful flight, isn't it? Yes. I've not gotten to witness that. But they break pretty hard, right? Yeah. It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Witnesses, and every once in a while you see a white one.
Yes, right. Every once in a while there's an albino. Yep. Albinos are real rare, but every once in a while, and that's what, when I go to Bracken now, that's what I'm always looking for, is that one or two those albino bats that come out of there and they're pure white. So that's pretty cool that you got to witness that. Not everybody gets to see that. So this is radar, just to kind of show you what happens. So here's, these are all moths that the bats are going to go out to try to catch. There's so many moths in the air that the radar can pick them up. This is a bat cave over in Uvalde County, or not Uvalde, not Medina, maybe Medina County. And this is San Antonio right here. So watch this area right here. Old Tunnel is up in this area right here. So this was at 6:04. That's 6:27. That's a lot of bats. And there are no caves down here. So all of these bats coming out of Bracken are heading in this direction and going right at those moths. They're pretty impressive stuff. So now let's talk about the bats. Yes, go ahead. Oh, really? Okay. Oh, very good. That's good to know. Sounds like a business opportunity.
So,
Squatters.
Hey, Craig,
Yes.
if you could repeat the question so that
Oh,
the
yes, yeah.
folks that are online can hear it.
Well,
'cause I
she was
can't- I
saying
can't
that
run.
she's frequently found Mexican free-tailed bats in people's houses. And those may be young bats that are out and that just don't make it back on a given night during the summer, you know? Oh, really? So you got small colonies. I was wondering about that. That's it. That's good to know. So, but getting in the house, and then you can put excluders on your house, but as she was mentioning, then all of a sudden they may move to the neighbor's house. So that's why I said that sounds like a business opportunity. So we have some bats that are distributed statewide. We've already talked about, actually every one of these bats are statewide distributed bats. Oops, let me go back. These are some bats that I wanted to share with you. The big free-tailed bat is a bat that may be around here. It has an interesting distribution. It's in the western part of the state, central part of the state. So it's not everywhere, but it's kind of interesting. It'll be interesting to see if we pick this one up on the recordings. And then the cave myotis, you'll notice, is not in this area, but I wanted to put it up there anyway, because I think it'll be interesting to see if it does show up or not. It's close enough to make you wonder. This, by the way, these are all the chapters of naturalists, and then overlaid with the distribution of bats based on Ammerman's book within the chapters. So that's why these look this way. And Wendy Anderson produced all this for us, so have to give her a big shout out on that. And so now we have the northern yellow bat, which should be in our area. I say your area. And the southern yellow bat, which maybe or maybe not. Be interesting to see what we find. There we go. And then we have the Seminole bat. This is another bat that has a call similar to the tricolored and the hoary bat. But you can see it should be found in this area as well, kind of on the southern end. It's another SGCN. Species of greatest conservation need. These are the more uncommon bats that we have. And then here's the range of the big brown bat. Shows you it's in your area. It's in your area as well. It has wide distribution. And then the evening bat has a similar distribution. Not quite, doesn't get all the way out into the panhandle. But again, some of these distributions are based on where on the range maps in this book, you'll see individual little dots in certain counties. Those are physical records in museums. There is another shape of dot where it's presumed that they're there based on a written description. And then the grayed out area, which is what a lot of this is based on where those have been actually documented. The thought is that they must exist in those areas. But again, till we start projects like this, we don't know 100% for sure. And then you have a couple. Here's the Raffinus bat. And then another one, the southeastern myotis, one of the few myotis bats that we have in this part of the state. Some are in West Texas. And then just to let you know, we do have two nectar feeding bats, tip classic nectar feeding bats, the Mexican long-tongued and the Mexican long-nosed. Both of them are out in the Big Bend area. And then these are the bats with a single record. So that's not something you're going to expect to see. Well, we don't expect to see it, but you never know. Won't that be a great argument? Somebody volunteer calls me up. I think we have a southwestern small-footed myotis. Okay, well, that'll raise some eyebrows. Oh yeah, there you go. Yes. Well, it would probably be over the myotis in particular. They all kind of overlap. So you would have to get somebody that's pretty expert to look at it and say, yeah, sign off on it, I would say. But here's the deal. We don't know what we don't know, right? So I expect that we will have some surprises. I told the ladies yesterday, and I got the species wrong. It was a ghost-faced bat that we found at the Kerr. Yeah, or more moops, or more ops, whatever, more mops. That's a bat that shouldn't have been where we were recording. It was on the edge of the map, but we found it, and the call was so distinctive. It was the L-shaped one, remember I was describing? And most bats are a J-shaped call. This was an L-shaped call, and that's the only bat that does that. And so that, again, one of those surprises. So that's what I think is kind of fun to think about, is that we may get some surprises that'll teach our bat biologists and experts some new things over time. And even those chapters where there's not a lot of diversity of bats, we'll find out if that still holds or if there's more going on than we know. Yes. There are the only treatment I know of is the box culverts for the tricolored bats here in East Texas. That they've and I don't know what's in the chemical is, but it's not toxic to the bats or the other animals in the cave in those situations. And that's the only one I know of that's going on right now. In fact, Merlin Tuttle doesn't believe in treating any of it. He says let it, and the bats that survive and adapt. And there is starting to be some indication that some of the bats are adapting to it. So we'll see how that plays out over time. And ultimately, you can't go into every cave in Texas and treat them over and over and over and over again. It's not going to work. So the other interesting thing about white nose syndrome is it's a disease in Europe, and the bats over there have adapted to it. So they're not suffering because this is a novel, kind of like the corona. I mean, kind of like what happened in 2020. Novel disease, bam, took out a whole bunch of human beings. Now it's becoming kind of like, yeah, I got COVID, but it lasted for 4 or 5 days and I'm fine. So it's one of those things where it first hit, it hammered us. But then now over time, as it evolves and we've adapted, it's way nature works, So just to show you in the Cradle of Texas chapter, you've got 12 species of bats based on Ammerman's book. 6 of those are SGCN. So there's some work to be done here, which is exciting, I think. By the way, the most bats are out in the Trans-Pecos and the Tierra Grande, which you'd expect out in all those mountains. So now let's talk about the bats, some interesting information about bats. Of course, they are consuming insect pests, helping with crop yields, or reducing pesticide use. The nectar bats, of course, aid in plant pollination. And in fact, if you drink tequila, you need to thank bats, because they're pollinating the flowers that turn into the seeds that turn into new agave plants, right? That's why there's one company, is it Kettle? I don't know what it is. I don't drink, but there's one that actually, if you look at the label, has a bat on it. Yeah. I don't know. Nobody's going to tell me what it is. Nobody wants to admit it. Back in the day. And of course, the economic tourism in Austin, or at Bracken Cave or at Old Tunnel. Old Tunnel actually, it's a 10-acre state park. And when they were a wildlife management area, they were generating money. No other wildlife management area was kind of generating that kind of money. And people pay a lot of money to go see those bats. So it is a tourism driver in Texas in particular. And of course, we get a lot of scientific advancement off of the research being done on bats all the time. Oops, wait. Okay. So this is a 2023 North American State of the Bats report. By the numbers, 52% are at risk of decline, 82% are impacted by climate change, and 98% are losing habitat. Top threats are drought. And I know where I live in Bernie, we are getting, drought is becoming more common than not. We've been in stage 4 drought in Bernie for now 2 years, going into the 3rd year. And even though you drive over there right now, it's lovely and green. Dig down 2 inches into the soil and there's nothing. There's no moisture. So it could turn into another drought year for us, or continuation. Temperature extremes, outright destruction of bat roosts, the poison prey thing. We talked about the chemical pesticides, mortality from wind turbines, and of course, white nose syndrome. So lots of threats. These are the slides where I depress you. It does usually typically end up with a 100% cave mortality at a roost. Let's see if I can get it to go here. The timeline is across the top: 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, all the way through 2022. So it's made its way to Canada. It's now made it all the way to Washington State. So it's come across the entire country. So again, the name destructans is a good scientific name, unfortunately. So in Texas, you can see the scales here. 20 counties have confirmed white nose syndrome, whereas 37 counties know that they've discovered the fungus. Those numbers have probably changed since I got this a year ago. This was a report back in January 26 to the TPWD Commission in 2023. I'm sure that's changed since that time. You can see a lot of it is focused around the hill country, the Edwards Plateau area. So unfortunately, it's a challenge. This is where back in 2015, the North American bat monitoring program was initiated to try to get a better understanding and handle on the bat distribution across the United States. And so these are long-term objectives. So this project we're starting, it's not a one and done, it's not a two and done. What we hope is it becomes a sustainable year-to-year project, so that the more data we collect over time, we start to get trends in numbers. This technique that we're using is identifying where species are. It's not really telling us much about population size, but it is giving us understanding. And then also it can, let's say for the first 3 years at your house and you're picking up species X, and then the next 3 years species X goes away. That's when we start saying, okay, what's going on? But the only way we can know for sure is long-term studies. So I'm super appreciated. I threw you all under the bus, because when I conjured up this idea with our former bat biologist, I thought, he's like, how can we make this happen? And I said, I know. There's 48 chapters of Master Naturalists across Texas. I'll bet they'd be interested. And I haven't looked at my email the last 2 days, so that's not a good thing, because I've been on the road. But when I left my office on what's today, Tuesday, when I left there was over 400 people that signed up throughout the state, Master Naturalists. So pretty cool. And one of the things that said in their plan, this plan, which is online, says the success of NA BAT will likely depend on the use of citizen science volunteers. And it's really, really true. Our one bat biologist does not have the capability or the time or anything else. She has the capability. She doesn't have the time, or the capacity is the word I'm looking for. Don't tell her I said capability. That wouldn't go over well. She doesn't have it. It's just not possible to do that. So that's where citizen science involvement is critical to this. And just to show you why this is important, the map on the right of Texas shows the distribution of the cave myotis, the tricolored bat, I'm sorry. And you'll notice that it goes all the way across the state. But again, the gray area is where they think it should be based on the actual record specimens. But then you go to NA BAT and look at their modeling for distribution. Notice what state is missing. They don't have enough data to be able to know. That's why we're going to be filling in gaps of knowledge for not only for Texas, Parks and Wildlife and bat researchers here, but then also for this nationwide project. Yes. Not at this point. That's a great suggestion. Right now, we're just trying to get this thing rolled out. But yeah, and so one of the other things that we're looking at down the road is starting these are going to be stationary surveys, right? The other main form of surveys are roadside surveys where you mount a detector to the top of a vehicle and you drive a specific route at a specific rate of speed, and bats that you pass by or pass by you get documented, and that's when you can start looking at population estimates. So that's another phase that we hope to roll out in the future, and that would be another thing that could be done to supplement that information. Now, a lot of those specimens that get turned into that don't make it may end up on maps like this where they put a specimen into a museum collection. So, but that's actually a good suggestion because I know a lot of bats come in. Yes. Well, I can't even address that. I would not be able to address that. I do think there is a law in Texas saying you can't. Well, even for them, it's a little bit of an issue. So they have to, I think they know about it. I don't know how that's managed. So, but I've not dealt with that issue at all. So to address it would be not a smart thing for me to do. So, yes. I have not heard that. I have not heard that. And the whole thing with insect decline is depending on where you are. Like in parts of Europe, they've noticed declines. In the United States, it's there's research going on. In Canada, I know there's been declines, and especially related to pesticide use in Canada. In the United States, it's a little bit, I don't know if there's as much research going on right now. So those, when we talk about the insect whatever, the decline of all these insects, it could be localized in different parts of the world. In the United States, the jury's still out. As I look at it, and a lot of you probably look at it, and I've heard this go both ways. When I was a kid in Iowa and I'd go fishing, catfishing at night, by the time when I came home, my windshield was nothing but a big insect splatter mark. That rarely happens. Now I'm in Texas now, but you don't see that. Although the other night I was doing a program at Garner State Park and I drove home in the night and I was pleasantly, well, I was pleasantly surprised to see a lot of insects in my lights. A few of them did meet my windshield, but that was a pleasant surprise. But I have no reference point because I had never driven on that road before. So that we have to take those things not with a grain of salt, but we have to take those things and go, okay, where are they specifically talking about? There is evidence of that, of insect decline. There's no doubt about it. And my sense is that when I go to Boston to visit my granddaughter, for example, I noticed the first thing in the spring when the trees come out, the leaves are hammered by insects right after they've emerged. So there's fewer birds, there's fewer bats. That's got to have an impact on that. So there might actually, if you lose bats and you lose insect-eating birds, it might be a surge of insects, but it may be just a temporary thing based on that. But I'm not smart enough to contemplate all that complexity. But whether there's a correlation or not, I have not heard that that's been established one way or the other. But it will be interesting to see over time how those things all factor together. I mean, there's reports that North America has lost 3 billion birds over the last, what is that report? I think it was 50 years, something like that. It's a phenomenal loss of birds. You see it just if you're a bird watcher and you go out, other than waterfowl, most groups of birds are declining significantly. Grassland sparrows, any grassland bird in particular, you all know that. You live in the Gulf coastal prairie areas. You know how much of that has been lost, right? But does anybody know why waterfowl numbers are doing fine? What's that? What's that? Maybe, but not primarily. Habitat conservation by the very people that go out and hunt them. Ducks Unlimited, those agencies, the people that are using them as a resource are also protecting their resource because they're putting their money where their mouth is. When it comes to songbirds and insects and all that stuff, we all shake our heads and go, oh my gosh, this is too bad. But nobody's willing to put a, 1 penny sales tax on a pair of binoculars that goes to bird conservation or whatever. So the Ducks Unlimited people, they've done the work and done the job. And so those birds in wetland situations are doing well. Everybody else is doing terrible. So it's a perfect example. A lot of people that don't, well, hunters are blah, blah. No, actually, hunters are probably some of the best conservationists we have in North America. And I'm not even a hunter. So, which might sound strange coming from TPWD staff person, but I fish, but I don't hunt. But they're the ones that are actually doing things for the benefit of wildlife. So this is what anybody grits, these cells all over the United States. And so what your chapter is doing right now, Mickey and others, are figuring out where are we going to put the detectors within these different squares. And there's some rules about how do you put them in. They know that through the training. I won't spend the time. So every inch of Texas is within a square, a 10 by 10 kilometer square. Those are the squares in Texas that have been adopted for some bat research. There's a lot of information to fill in, right? That's a lot of information. That's why this project is so valuable to us. And so this would be 1 5 by 5 cell. You can put as many as 4 detectors within that. They are working hard at figuring that out right now. So one of the things I want to tell you, this citizen science project, there are different ways of being involved. One is just to be like, I'm a bird watcher and I'm using eBird to mark all my birds. Or I'm using iNaturalist to document things, and then I'm just putting them into iNaturalist, and that's it. That's all I'm doing. But the people that are taking that data are taking advantage of the fact that you're a bird watcher or you love using iNaturalist and using your data. You may not even know it. This project, we're asking the master naturalists not only to do some of this planning right here, a much more big involvement, we're going to have master naturalists be the analysts of all this data. So this is a level of involvement in a citizen science project that goes well beyond the typical project. So it's pretty cool. This is the information you get from those grit cells of what bats should be there. We'll find out what actually are. So we're going to be using things called audio moths and song meter mini bats. They're going to be 1 week surveys from you put it out on a Monday and you pick it up on a Friday morning. They're conducted. We're actually going to be starting on April 29th and going through the end of June. We're going to be looking at trying to get a variety of habitats to sample. For example, we were out on the prairie yesterday and we were talking about, could we put a detector out there? I'd put one right in the middle of that prairie. Let's see what's going on in a big grassland like that in terms of bats. People might think, well, there's no light. There's no big pools of standing water. Why would there be bats out there? I think we will be surprised with the results. I really do. Maybe I'm wrong. But we have some rules of how to do that. Storing all that data, it's going to be a mass amount of data that comes in. Fortunately, I've been working with a staff member at TPWD who has a server that we can use to store all that data. And we will be sharing that data with any bat. So if you're a site for a bat detector, one of the things you have to do is sign a waiver saying that that data can be shared publicly. If you don't wish to sign that, then you can't have a detector from this project on your property. Because we're not going to go through the hassle of attorneys and everybody else saying, well, what do you do with my data? That's why that waiver is really important, and Mickey knows all about that. So very important. All right, so these are the different roles that being filled by volunteers within your chapter and the other chapters around the state that are participating. So if you have questions, Mickey's she's She's the one to go look and talk to. And go, yeah, she may become more batty, depending on how this goes. We'll see. We may all become more batty. I'm kind of at that point right now, just with email. So anyway, these are the duty. I'm not going to spend any time on this. I know I've already talked for a long time, so we'll get through these if I can get the thing to come on. There we go. Am I going the right way? Yeah. Okay, there's what the coordinators. Am I stuck in a loop now? No, there we go. So the volunteers again are going to be placing them on their properties. We're working it out to get them some of these detectors on state parks, wildlife management areas. But because of the timing, we're focusing right now on private properties because we can collect a lot of data there and get through this first year. These are what the detectors look like. They're not very large, but they're very effective at recording bat acoustic calls. And apparently you can do it in your pajamas. There you go. Michelle's kids and her husband, yes. Yeah, they live at the Kerr Wildlife Management Area, so they were doing some field testing for me. This is the data sheet. There is data we have to collect with each location. Not to scare you off, but there's some data collection that has to be done if we're going to turn it into NA-BAT. And then we have the data review people are going to be using the software called Kaleidoscope to analyze the bat data. This is what a typical recording spectrogram of a bat call looks like, or a bat sequence. That's an individual call. That's a typical shape for the bats. Kind of neat. What we're looking for, there are different kinds of calls. We're going to be looking at search phase calls. Notice they're kind of steady all the way across. They're easily separated. When they get close to an insect, you have the approach calls where they get tighter, frequent a little bit, and then you have all of those calls stacked together. That's the feeding buzz, and then going back into the search phase. So we're looking at search phase calls because those are the most distinctive. Now I'm going to play this, and it should play, so we'll all be very quiet. See what you hear. Could you hear that? It'll get louder. I've slowed this down to 1/10 of a second, so that's why it's so big. That's the feeding buzz. Yeah. Then goes back into the search phase call. So you'll notice on this, see how this is real orange right here? That bat was closer to the receiver as it was passing by. And then it got a little bit farther away, or it turned its head away from the receiver for another echolocation call. And then notice how the frequency changed. It actually went up. These are all in kilohertz, by the way. And then it dropped back down into the feeding buzz. So there's that variation as the bat's flying around, which makes, the analysis a little more challenging. Here are some different examples of known species calls. You can see a lot of them have that backwards J shape to them. Some are steeper than others. Some are flatter. These guys have really bizarre shapes. Yes, only bats. Yeah. Thankfully. So give you a couple of ideas. This is from a hoary bat. They call from about 18 normally to about 21 kilohertz. It's one of the only species that calls this low. So that's why it's more distinctive. Yes, sir. Yes. That's their sound taken and made so we can hear it. Yes, exactly. Good question. So there's a real flat call, low on the kilohertz scale of the hoary bat. Here's a tricolored bat that goes from way down here around 40. There's 42, so maybe 41, and actually extends all the way up close to 60. Okay, so that's another variation of a call. And then you have this one, completely different than those others I just showed you. This one is up in the 50 kilohertz range, but instead of being a J, it's I call it an L shape, or a J laid on its side, where it starts out here and then actually drops off, which is the only bat in North America that does that. So if a ghostface bat, and if a ghostface bat shows up here, that would be something. I doubt that'll happen. But again, you can kind of see the variation in those calls of what our volunteer analysts will be looking at. And then the other thing that has to be kept in mind, we're not going to go into detail, don't worry. The bottom line is a lot of them can't be told apart. So sometimes it's one of these two bats because the calls are so similar. And that is for anybody that's here that's agreed to be an analyst. It's all, unless you have the bat in your hand, you will never be able to say it was definitely that, unless it was like a ghostface bat. That's so different. But you're going to be able to go, we're pretty confident it's this one, right? So if you're a data analyst that needs a distinct answer on every question, yes or no, this might not be for you. Or you have to just broaden your thinking. This is the timeline. We're already into April. We're going to do the detector training this afternoon. We're distributing them across the state by the end of this week so that we can roll these things out starting on April 29th. So there's a lot of work to be done. Anyway, if you are interested, if you have not heard about this, or now you go, maybe I'll try this. You can go back to TMN Tuesday, find the recording, and then there's a link on that on the TMN Tuesday page where you can sign up. I'm not doing a super good job, but I'm trying to keep the coordinators up to date on who's signing up on my list. I'll be sending out another one of those at the end of the month. This is the form you fill out. Make sure when you go here, if you do, the default is Alamo. Make sure you put your chapter, not Alamo. I can figure it out sometimes because there's an address in Houston and it says Alamo chapter. Except that there's multiple chapters around here, so it makes it a little more. Closing thoughts. I do think that this has the potential to have a lot of insight to bats and better understanding than we've ever had before. I think that you guys do so much for your community and for the state. This is another example of being able to make a major contribution on a statewide basis, and I am thrilled that most chapters have some level of involvement with this. And it I hope will become an annual project that goes on year after year within the chapter. And I know that there'll be times where somebody moves from a location but there'll be hopefully other locations that we'll be able to take advantage of. We've gotten very positive response from the wildlife management areas, national wildlife refuges, other agencies that are very interested in getting a detector on their property. So we're just working through those details now, and that will take some time with some of them. So this first year is the pilot year to get our ducks in a row, to get the kinks worked out. And so if you're involved in this project, any feedback you have, you can either send it through Mickey or you can email me directly. You don't have to worry. I got thick skin. If I'm doing something wrong, tell me. The only way that we can make things better is communication. And I know a lot of times you go, well, I don't want to say anything. With this project, I give you permission. Tell me, because I can't make it better. All of these people are to be thanked for photographs, for information that I gleaned from their publications, things like that. And then finally, for every one of our presentations, if you take a picture of that with your phone, you can fill out a very brief voluntary survey that the Fish and Wildlife, who funds us with a lot of our work, would like to have knowledge that we're actually out here talking to people. So, but that's up to you. It's voluntary. Some of you don't have to do it, but we appreciate those of you that do. I'll leave it up there for another couple of seconds since I see phones up. It's like, it doesn't ask for your name or your address or any of that stuff. It's maybe how old you. Oh yeah, the airplane mode. That's right. That's right. Good point. Yeah, you could take a picture of it. Yeah, good point. When you've got it the way you want, and feel free to walk up and take a picture too. You don't have to sit all the way back there.
Okay.
Hopefully, I didn't go too far past my time frame. Sorry.
Very interesting.
I'm
Thank you.
I'm sort of famous for that, and
Had a question though.
need to have
We
a
do rehab
shocker.
with birds and animals.
Yes.
Do y'all have a rehab for bats? Just
Yeah, there are people that do bat rehabbing. Yes. Yeah.
okay. Okay.
The state, Texas, doesn't do it.
Yeah, I'm going to try to get the mic around to people
Okay.
that are asking questions so that.
Okay, two questions. Living around here, we can pretty much drive anywhere we want to survey. But for example, in the hill country, to your knowledge, has anybody ever fitted any of these receivers on the drones?
I've never heard of that.
For like, I mean, you can see where you want to go, but you can't get there.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that anybody's ever done that.
Okay. Anyway, just curious.
Especially for this kind of project.
The other thing on the sonar, do they only use sonar for food detection, or do we know if they can also use it for danger detection? I keep wondering how the wind turbines are a problem.
Well, the wind, they're, I think they're actually attracted to it.
It's a lot of food.
Potentially, yeah, yeah.
Because
But I've heard two things. One, the blades either hit them directly, and you can see there's been videos out there that show a bat flying because of the infrared cameras, and then you just see it go when it encounters the blade. I've also heard of the pressure gradient causing them to basically implode.
wow.
Yeah. So that I've heard both of those are ways that the bats and birds can die from it.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Oh, okay. And so that's going to obviously attract the bats. Thank you.
So Marty's comment was that the wind turbines attract the insects, and then that.
Yeah, the
attracts the
wind
bats.
turbines supposedly are attracting the insects, which attract the bats. Yeah. If you're a migratory species flying at a low altitude, you might encounter those and not even know they're there until it's too late.
Any-
Okay.
Were there any? Was anybody monitoring the
I don't know what that
online?
means.
No questions online. Any other questions here in the room?
Thank you for your time, everybody. Again, I apologize for going a little long.
Okay.